Since I released my realistic camera settings for F123, pretty much every other comment was, have I got recommended settings for the cockpit view in F123? So I thought what better way to start the week than was to listen to you guys and provide the content that you're asking for. So if you're a racer who would rather sit behind the wheel directly and emulate what the real world drivers see from the cockpit of a Formula 1 car, you can opt for the cockpit camera in F123. Now this view won't give you as much vision of what's happening around you, which is often why players use the T-cam view. What it does do is adds another layer of immersion. The sensation speed that you gain from using the cockpit cam is pretty impressive, and you can become lost in a race, especially if you're sitting in a sim rig with a racing wheel in front of you. We're seeing the new visor cam popping up more and more frequently in official F1 broadcasts, and this gives us a real sensation of the view that drivers actually have, along with the vibration and the sheer violence of trying to drive a Formula 1 car. Replicating this visor cam in F123 isn't quite possible, as we can't move the cockpit camera horizontally. Instead, it has to remain centered. Now this isn't a bad thing, as driving in cockpit cam with the view off-centered would be incredibly difficult. But what we can do is aim to replicate the visor cam viewpoint in almost every other way. We can look to replicate the distance from the steering wheel along with the height of the driver's head. Now, just a little warning that accurately replicating the visor cam in F123 will sit you pretty close to the steering wheel, and unless you're racing in VR or with an eye tracker, it can be hard to see anything around you. What I'll do now is suggest a couple of different settings for those who want ultra-realism and those who want a kind of semi-realistic view but with a little bit more of a line of sight around the cockpit. So to start with, let's pull up a still image from a recent visor cam. This is from Charles Leclerc at the 2023 Monaco GP, and there are a few things that we want to note from this. First of all, we'll disregard the side-on view, as we will always be centered in F123. We can pay attention to the view over the front of the car, along with how much of the front wheels we can see and how much of the steering wheel we can see. You can see that Leclerc has a view of the start of the nose of the car before it starts to drop away, and he can see the top quarter or third of the tyres. He can also see the very top of the brake ducts on the right wheel, although he can't see them on the left wheel at all. So if this viewpoint was centered, he would likely just about be able to see the very top of the brake ducts. Then we can see that the entire steering wheel is in his view, although the bottom's being masked by the crash helmet. Again, we can't replicate this in F123 without mods. And that the halo is almost entirely out of view at the top of the screen. The final point to note is that Leclerc can't see either mirror unless he turns his head, which will be the same in F123. So moving into F123, we can take these notes and apply them in-game to replicate this view as much as possible. First off, I'm going to aim to realistically replicate the view that we saw in that visor cam footage. But for many F123 players, this will be too close to the steering wheel, and it will limit the vision around the cockpit. But I do want to provide realistic settings first. Then I'll adjust the camera settings to open up the view a little bit, which will form our recommended cockpit cam settings. But starting with the realistic view first, I'll show you the settings I've used on screen now, and you can see that we have a very similar view to the visor cam. We can see the top quarter of the tyres, we can see out over the front of the car, the halo is almost hidden away at the top of the screen, and we can see most of the steering wheel. This is very close to replicating that visor cam footage and what a real F1 driver would actually see. But the problem with this view is that I feel it's a bit too close to the steering wheel, and I can't see anything around me. It's important to turn the look to apex up pretty high, as this will turn the camera towards the apex when turning into a corner, and this lets your eye flow naturally into the turn as it would in real life. But next, I'm going to make some adjustments to these realistic settings to make the camera a bit easier to use in F123. These adjustments basically open up the view and let us see more of what is going on around us. The main adjustment I've made here is to the field of view, which I've set pretty close to default. This lets us see more of what is happening around us, but we'll still keep the realism from the visor cam. We can still see about the same amount of the tyre, and the halo is still sitting pretty high on the screen. The other adjustments I've made are to reduce the look to apex setting, as this isn't required to be as high in this view, as we can already see a bit more of the corner on the approach. I've also hidden the halo column, Now this will be personal preference, but I'd recommend hiding it to really see what's in front of you. With this view, you still have limited view out of your mirrors, and will only really be able to see them if you're running an ultra-wide monitor using VR or using an eye tracker. You can assign an input on your racing wheel or controller to look around the car and around the cockpit if you do want a bit more freedom over your view. But that will round out these recommended camera settings for those who like to race F123 in cockpit camera. You can choose either of these settings or a combination of the two based on your own preference and how much realism you want to replicate. Please let me know in the comments below which camera you're using and which setting approach you took, ultra realism or a slightly wider view. And if you're enjoying these F123 videos as well as our setups and other how-to guides, please consider subscribing. But for now guys, I will see you on track.